Hello, Sacred Studios here, and today we have the best action figure I've ever made. I don't say that often, okay, guys? So when I say it's the best action figure I ever made, I really mean it. And now let me look at these guys. And technically, it's the best action figures I've ever made because they're actually two separate action figures. We have Banjo and Kazooie from Banjo Kazooie, and they're two separate figures, and they attach via a mechanism on Banjo's backpack that I'll get into later. But they're not actually bound to each other at all. Just like Banjo Tooie, they're two completely separate characters that you can connect, but they're not stuck together. But let's get on to Banjo first because I did a poll on my Twitter, and apparently he's the favorite out of the two. Even though me personally, I like Kazooie better. But Banjo's the fan favorite, maybe because he's more popular. I don't know. But the way I made him was kind of complicated, actually. So I used this Five Nights at Freddy's, I think Glam Rock Freddy as a base. I don't know. I don't play Five Nights at Freddy's or anything like that. I just picked it. I was like, well, it's a bear, so it's gonna be pretty close. And the reason I picked Glamrock Freddy is, first off, it came with a really cool looking microphone. But more importantly, it had similar enough proportions as Banjo. One issue was that his arms were really, scrawny. Banjo has like really, muscular, I guess. Not muscular, but he has really big arms. But Glamrock Freddy has like really scrawny looking arms. Look like I could, break them off. But back to Banjo himself, I decided to give him like a ton of fur so it covers up the fact that the original piece was really small and scrawny looking. So originally I was just going to use epoxy and just like what I usually do with my figures. But epoxy is pretty heavy, and that's really bad on an arm because he won't be able to hold up the arm without gravity, doing its job. And so the only other option I could think of was to use hot glue. Hot glue is always good for making fur effects, which I learned when I made my Cynthia action figure. But luckily it turned out really good, and I was able to use like a ton of layers of hot glue in order to make like his arms actually look like big arms like Banjo has, not like the scrawny arms of Glamrock Freddy. So I just kept using tons and tons of hot glue layers until it finally looked like Banjo. Not Banjo's been skipping arm day. I did the same thing with his legs as well, even though I didn't have to use as many layers because Glamrock Freddy, he doesn't have any fur on him, but his legs are a lot better than his arms are in regards to resembling Banjo. But I did have to shorten it a bit, so I actually had to cut out a chunk of his legs because Glamrock Freddy is actually a little too tall for scale of my collection personally. And I was like, well, let me just shorten him slightly. And honestly, it turned out pretty good. In fact, I forgot that I even shortened him to begin with until now because the fur completely covers over it. Now his shorts were, probably the easiest part for me. I just used epoxy for that because it was such a small amount of epoxy that I didn't really mind using it. If I used it all over his legs, then it would have like weighed him down. Which, I mean, it's not as bad because it's the legs, not the arms, but it's still something that I need to worry about. And I guess one issue with using the Glamrock Freddy as a base is because I couldn't make the belt buckle as big as I wanted because it would interfere with articulation, and I wanted to prioritize articulation over everything because I'm using this as for my stop motion series. But his belt buckle is there, and it's pretty big. It's not as big as I wanted it to be, but it still stands out enough. And lastly, I made his I guess pad on his stomach, I don't know what that's called, and his backpack buckles out of epoxy as well. And his shark tooth is made out of epoxy. One thing that's not made out of epoxy is his little necklace. That's actually made out of like a small wire I had. Moving on to Kazooie, this action figure was my favorite out of the two to make. Actually, one of my favorite action figures that I've ever made before And maybe that's possibly due to the fact that she's like entirely 3D printed. As in, I didn't use a base at all for her. I completely 3D printed her, which is the first time I believe I've ever done that with an articulated figure. The only parts that aren't, 3D printed are her joints, but besides that, everything's 3D printed. The backpack she's in is 3D printed as well. And the reason I did this is A, I mean, I can really find an action figure that looked like Kazooie, and B, because I wanted her to be able to attach and detach from Banjo's backpack. I can't do that with a pre-existing figure. I had to make my own. So the way I actually have her attached on Banjo is using two methods. So first off, I have two separate backpacks. One with the flap closed, one with the flap open, in which you can attach Kazooie to it. So the one with the flap closed is attached to Banjo's back using a magnet. So I have a bunch of little magnets into the backpack itself, and I have a bunch of magnets on Banjo's back. And it was really easy to attach the magnets on Banjo's back because, again, I used super glue, super hot glue, in order to make the fur effect. So when I attached the magnets, the drill, easily was able to cut into it because it was just cutting into, hot glue and not like plastic or something hard like that. And it works perfectly. It's not, the magnets aren't so strong that I struggle to take Kazooie like off of Banjo, but it's not like super weak that it's like falling off all the time. And yeah, again, that's also the same way I have Kazooie herself attached to the backpack. I have two separate magnets going into Kazooie's bottom and going into the top of the backpack. So that's how I attached all of that. And again, one pro of having a 3D printed action figure is I can easily exchange parts. So Kazooie actually has a lot more parts to her than Banjo does. The main one is she has two separate bodies. This body is like half of a body, and it's whenever she's attached to Banjo. But as you guys know, in Banjo-Tooie, Kazooie's not always attached to Banjo. They're two separate characters. So pretty much I 3D printed a separate body of Kazooie. This is the full body of Kazooie, in which you can actually detach the wings from the old body, attach them to the new body, and I also made these legs for Kazooie, with her feet being made with a 3D printer, and the legs, of course, being made with chopsticks, because at this point it's a tradition. And just two joints are attached as well, and they just go into the body of Kazooie. There's also a little tail that goes into the bottom of Kazooie, so she has like her tail feathers, and that's pretty much how I do that. It's actually the same part as the parts that go into Banjo. It's not, I didn't make two separate Kazooies like I originally did with my original Banjo-Kazooie action figure, because back then, I didn't have any interchanging parts, so I had to make two Kazooies pretty much. Just one Kazooie was a half of a Kazooie that went into Banjo. The other one was a full Kazooie. But one fun fact was I was able to make two separate faces for Kazooie. Now, the head was 3D printed from the same source as I got Banjo's head. I'll leave, again, the creator here. It's a modified version of the Smash Ultimate model, in which it's easier for it to 3D print. So the head with the mouth open was taken from that source. But I made a separate head with her mouth closed, because I was thinking, like, Kazooie doesn't always have her mouth open. Sometimes she wants to peck at stuff. So I modified the modification of the Smash Ultimate model so that her mouth is closed, so she can actually go around and peck at stuff. And the way the head detaches is at the joint at the neck, and I just take the head off and replace it with a new neck, or not new neck, with a new head. And that's pretty much how I do it. Also, a note is I got the wings from a source from Thingiverse, a completely different source as the heads. Unfortunately, she's not really too good at bending at the middle of the wings because it's pretty fragile because it's PLA. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I'll never do that. But it still looks cool, and it still gives her a bit of a flapping effect if you shake her back and forth, even though it is a bit fragile. I decided that it would be cool if I somehow made these guys able to do the Talon Trot. Now the Talon Trot is Banjo-Kazooie's dash in Smash Bros. It's pretty much a move in which instead of Banjo carrying Kazooie around, Kazooie carries Banjo around, and apparently somehow they're faster that way. I don't know. But the way I did that is, again, because I 3D printed everything, it was actually quite easy. So I 3D printed a third version of Banjo's backpack, this time with two holes drilled in the center, so I could insert Kazooie's legs from the version of the action figure I made with her outside of Banjo. And I just insert the legs on the bottom, and then with a magnet I put Banjo on the top. Now it's a bit of a balancing act, and they can't really run like that, but I mean, it's the Talon Trot. Now let's go into the accessories. So first up we have this little Banjo, which I didn't actually make, I just bought it off eBay. If you guys remember, it's the same Banjo that my old Banjo-Kazooie action figure used. I just reused it here, and luckily they're actually able to hold the Banjo better than my old figures, because I actually, posed Banjo right so he can actually hold stuff, and he can move his arms outwards, not just forward and backwards. On top of that, I actually made a little kazoo. She's able to hold it in her mouth, like her open mouth head is able to hold the kazoo in her mouth, which looks really cool. It looks just like the intro of the game. That was not intentional. She just happened to be able to do that. Lastly, we have this little Jiggy and an egg. This Jiggy, again, was just taken from the old Banjo-Kazooie action figure, but this egg accessory was made because I had extra epoxy laying around, and I already mixed it, and I was like, well, it's going to harden into something, so I decided to harden it into an egg shape and just painted it blue, and, well, that's it. I didn't want to waste it, so that's how I made that. But, yep. That's Banjo-Kazooie. Again, that's the best action figures I've ever been able to make. They turned out really awesome. Also, quick note, this was originally going to be a collab with Red Brick Studios, but unfortunately, communication didn't really work out. But I'm just going to go ahead and shout out his channel. He's making his own Banjo-Kazooie action figure, so please be sure to check that out. But with all that said, Sacred out.